Hello, and welcome to the California 10th Assembly District Candidates Forum, sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Marin County. I am League member Allison Howard, and I'll be your moderator. League member Elaine Biagini is our timekeeper. The candidates with us today are running for a 2-year term in the 10th Assembly District. They are Greg Allen and Marc Levine. Now, the candidates will make opening statements of 2 minutes, and we'll begin with Greg Allen.
Thank you, Professor Howard and ladies of the League of Women Voters, Assemblywoman Levine. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. I'm Gregory Allen. I was born here in Marin, at Marin General Hospital. I was raised in Marin my entire life. Went to school at Marin Catholic, and then after my parents divorced, I moved up to Nevada High School. My father, late father, was a plumber. It was UA Local 38. One of my brothers is still in the union, and I have a second brother who's in the grocers union as well. So I understand the good that the unions have done for helping worker safety, ensuring that wages are maintained, but I think a lot more needs to get done, and I think it's important, and I stand for ensuring that those salaries are maintained. I think a prevailing wage should happen in the state of California, which will ensure that good jobs remain in California, and that the people that have those jobs are spending the money in California versus taking it away to other states. I served honorably in the Air Force for 10 years. That's where I met my wife, Paula. She and I have raised 2 great kids, Adina and Greg Jr. Both of them, along with myself, attended the entire school system here in California from kindergarten all the way through universities, where both of them have their bachelor's degrees. They're both also selling software right now, so they're gainfully employed and taking care of themselves, which is probably the greatest accomplishment my wife and I have done together. So Paul and I have also grown a business here in the state of California. We know how difficult it is. We know that it's very costly, very difficult to employ people. It's very difficult to get rid of people that don't do well. So we've had upwards of 15 recruiters that have worked at us with various companies throughout the Bay Area, and another 9 that worked at administrative functions for us in Marin. So we know how to create jobs. The reason I'm running for this is that I've had some differences with Assemblyman Levine. I think that he has done a number of things in a short time in office. He's dodged a number of votes. He's also flip-flopped and waffled on a couple of issues that I think are important, and the reason I'm here today is to expose that, talk a little bit about the differences and how I will represent the state of California. District 10, I can guarantee you that when you send me to Sacramento, I will not dodge a vote. I'll be there for every vote.
Thank you. And Marc Levine.
Thank you very much to the Community Media Center of Marin, as well as the League of Women Voters, for hosting this debate. These debates are incredibly important to make sure that the electorate is well informed of who the candidates are, and that, of course, there's an election taking place, and we want as many people to participate in those elections as possible. Since I was elected 2 years ago, after serving on my local city council to the state assembly, we've been able to pass 2 on-time balanced budgets for the state of California that reinvest in education, as well as plan for our future. We've also been able to pass, that will be on the ballot this November, 2 propositions that are incredibly important to pay attention to. Prop 1, which is a lean, slim water bond that will make sure that we invest in conservation as well as climate change, as well as Prop 2, which is a rainy day fund that will ensure that California saves money during good times to spend during bad times, rather than the drastic cuts we've seen to education and important social services that so many Californians depend upon. This is an example of the legislature actually working, and it's been a sea change from years ago where the state government wasn't working very well, was making terrible cuts in the budget, but we also didn't get important legislation passed. This past 2 years, this legislative session, we have seen a complete change in that, where things are working again. I've been very proud to be a part of that. My tenure in the legislature has been an incredibly effective one, in which I've had 18 of my bills signed by Governor Brown into law, with an additional 4 sitting on his desk waiting for his signature, and of course my fingers are crossed that he'll sign these. Some of these bills have been far-reaching. For example, I've co-authored the bill to ban plastic bags in California, but also locally serving, things that will help Marin County and the North Bay on issues that are affecting us here locally. And I'm very proud to have that record. I'd be very proud to have your vote and to serve for another 2 years.
Thank you. Now for the questions. The candidates will have 90 seconds to answer. The first to answer will be Marc Levine. As you consider the next year in the Assembly, what accomplishments would you want to achieve by the end of the legislative session? Marc.
Thank you very much for that question. One of the things that I've noticed, particularly in the past session that we just completed, was the changing tone and culture in the Capitol, where we have a culture of bipartisanship once again, where a number of my bills have been co-authored by Republicans along with Democrats. And in fact, today, Governor Brown just signed a bill of mine that I co-authored with a Democrat and a Republican from the Central Valley, AB 2231, which would allow for seniors and the disabled to defer property taxes until they're able to afford those costs later on if they're in a difficult time. What I'd like to do is build upon that record of achievement, bipartisanship, making sure that the concerns and needs of people that live in our communities, both here in the North Bay but throughout California, are being well served by California and by the legislature. And I'm very proud of that record and want to continue doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And Greg, what would you like to accomplish at the end of the legislative session next year?
Thank you, Professor. There's a number of things that I think are important. First of all, Proposition 13 is in jeopardy in the state legislature. It was signed into law in 1978 and upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. It stands for the fundamental belief that Californians should not be taxed out of their homes. The supermajority, and Assembly Levine is part of it in Sacramento, has done a very good job in taking apart the defense of Proposition 13. Assembly Constitutional Amendment number 8 is one such a bill that they have authored and passed. In fact, they're normally in session on Monday through Thursday, but they came into session on an unusual Friday, and everybody thought they'd come back on Monday and vote for the bill. But Assemblyman Levine, along with the supermajority, went into session on Saturday and passed that. I want to make sure that we don't let those things happen anymore. The other thing I think is important is that Texas and New York are doing a phenomenal job recruiting California companies away from the area. I want to stand for the people in District 10 in the state of California, ensuring that we bring good jobs to our district, good high-paying jobs that are going to increase the tax base, not on the backs of property owners, but by fundamentally creating wealth. The other thing that I think is important is that Assemblyman Levine, he has docked a number of votes in his time in office. One such particular vote I think that is important for everybody to know is that, excuse me for a second, is Proposition 975. AB 975 gave enforcement power to the Coastal Commission to impose administrative civil penalties, and Assemblyman Levine opted out on that vote. He didn't vote for it, he didn't vote against it. That seems to be what he often does. He waffles and does not show up for very important votes.
Thank you, Greg. Let's explore some differences, since you raised that you do have some differences with your opponent. What two policy positions separate you from your opponent? We'll begin with Greg.
Again, my defense of Proposition 13 is paramount. I believe that Californians, especially those folks that are on fixed incomes, they don't need to be taxed out of their homes. I think it's important that we maintain the defense of that. It requires a 2/3 majority to increase taxes on any bill, and currently the Assembly is doing their part to raise or lower those thresholds to 55%. I think it's important that we maintain that. The other thing that's important is that Assemblyman Levine, again, ducked the vote on AB 375. The one that really concerned me the most and got me seriously involved in this is AB 375. It's the Assembly floor in May of 2013. Up until that point, Assemblyman Levine didn't oppose it. He agreed with that bill, and then when it came time to vote on it, he was nowhere to be found. Another example of a very important bill. It basically was unsafe for children. It amplified moral hazard, incentivized and employing districts to enter into agreements with employees that are alleged to have committed egregious misconduct and abuse of children in the classroom. These are the types of bills that need a vote. If you don't agree with a particular bill, then stand up there and vote against it. If you don't show up for the vote, you're not doing the job that the people are elected you to do. That's something that you will not have happen with me. I will go and make those tough votes, unlike Assemblyman Levine has.
Thank you. And Mark, what two policy positions separate you from your opponent?
Well, I think there's a broader difference in the way that I approach public policy and legislation than the more rigid response from my opponent, which is some of the problems that we've seen in Sacramento in the past. So when we look at legislation, there's a lazy way of voting on that legislation. You can look at the support list, you can look at the opposed list, and you can pick a side. What I tend to do is I actually want to read the legislation, find out what it does. What are the intended goals? And what will the real consequences of these goals be? Will they be the intended ones or the unintended consequences that California unfortunately has had to live through for so many years of the unintended consequences of legislation that was not well thought out. Fortunately, on the piece of legislation that Greg had mentioned, we actually got that bill right. We were actually able to pass it as part of the budget this year. And I was very proud to be a key part of negotiating a compromise to make sure that our coastal protections were there. But that's the difference. How do we approach our policies? Do we go the lazy way, or do we work a little bit harder, make it go a little bit longer, but get those policies right? I think for the long term, and for the state of California, and for our community in Marin, it's much more important to roll up our sleeves, to do the work, to not fall back on those rigid positions of conservative Republicans or liberal Democrats, but actually be oriented toward the policy outcomes that we hope will be good for the state of California into the future.
Thank you, Mark. So, taking a look at your thoughts about the 10th Assembly District, what do you think should be the top 3 concerns of those who reside in the 10th Assembly District? We'll begin with Mark.
Yes, this is a very important question for me because as I was elected, we were coming through some very difficult years in the state of California with huge budget deficits. The voters passed Prop 30, which increased taxes, and it was very important to me to make sure that we reinvested that money in education, but that we also rebuild our budget in a way that is sustainable long term, so we never have to go back to the days of drastic budget cuts. And that's why voting for Prop 2 in November is so important, to make sure that we save money for a rainy day so that we can protect those critical services that we care so much about: healthcare, education, our universities and colleges. And finally, especially with the passage of Prop 1 that will be on the ballot in November as well, reinvest in our environment again. Can we protect our local watersheds? Can we prepare for climate change? And as we look forward, let's plan for the future, not just for the year that's ahead of us, not for just the budget that's ahead of us, but how do we plan in a sustainable way, economically, education-wise, and environmentally for the next 50 years and further out. I think that the passage of Prop 1, the water bond, and putting that on the ballot, along with the groundwater regulation legislation that we passed, they're the 2 most significant pieces of water legislation that California has seen for the past 100 years. And these are very important issues for the state now and well into the future.
Greg.
I agree with Senator Levine as far as the position of defending Proposition 1, the water bond. I think it's important. It's a $7 billion bond that will hopefully get us out of the troubles that we're going to face in a current drought and droughts that will come in the future. What does concern me is that Assemblyman Levine, he tells you he's doing good things for legislation. Maybe he can explain to us why he was absent for the vote to defend or defeat AB 375. That was a bill that restricted school districts from dismissing staff expeditiously that were abusing children and other adults on campus. Or the fact that he also dodged that vote for AB 975, again, that gave administrative power to the Coastal Commission to impose civil penalties. Those are areas, again, you can't just dodge a vote and think that that's good legislative effect. You have to be there and you have to take a stand pro or con and defend that for the people that you represent. I don't think ducking a vote is the way we're going to get it done. I think that on the positive side, I think it's important also that we oppose high-density housing projects like a 180-unit Wind Cup project at Corte Madera and other projects that are destined to go in and create thousands of units in Mill Valley, Novato, San Rafael, and Larkspur. Even though the City Council told citizens there that it would not support the project, or the Lucas Valley Silvera Farm project, where Assemblyman Levine lobbied the regulatory agency of the State Water Resource Board to change the toxic cleanup order. He, along with the supervisor at that time that sided with him, who has since been voted out of office, the same thing should happen to Assemblyman Levine, and we should make a change in Sacramento for the people of District 10.
Thank you, Greg. Turning to housing now. There's been a lot of discussion about affordable housing in Marin over the past few years. It's pretty clear now that the affordable housing issue has growing opposition. I have a 3-part question for both of you. We will begin with Greg Allen. Are the protests unreasonable? What is your definition of affordable housing? And is affordable housing an important and realistic goal for Marin? Greg.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. Again, I think it goes right back to the high-density housing issue. These projects like Wind Cup will have you believe that they're going to be catering to low-cost housing. And in fact, there's 180 units that are in that project over there, which is also probably the slowest built project I've ever seen in my time in anywhere in the state of California. But only 3 of those units are destined for low income. And I think that's important that we understand what's happening here. They're trying to remake the face of Marin. Assemblyman Levine authored a bill, AB 1537, which was going to change Marin County's designation from metropolitan to suburban. It was going to lower the threshold from 30 units per acre to 20 units per acre. The difficult thing to understand is that Marin County is currently at 7 units per acre. So if we're going to lower from 7 to 20, maybe those are classes that I didn't take in school. So maybe Assemblyman Levine can explain to us how that is going to help the county of Marin and later in Sonoma County, because the same thing is going to happen up there as well. High density housing should be an issue taken up by the people in those areas and not by the legislature or bureaucrats in Sacramento. Again, simple math tells me that 7 units per acre is far lower than the 20 units per acre that you're thinking is going to happen with AB 1537. Excuse me.
Thank you. And Mark.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'm just in awe and wonder about the creativity and imagination that went into my opponent's response to that. I think it's very important, particularly because of my work on AB 1537, that Marin is designated as a suburban community. Unfortunately, because of the unintended consequences of a bill 10 years ago, Marin was designated as metropolitan, and I think if anyone who lived here, you ask them, are we an urban community or a suburban community? It's pretty clear that along the 101 we're suburban, but if you go a little bit further out, we're even a rural community. But if you took someone from some other part of the state, they would also recognize Marin as suburban or even rural. My bill protects that, and I've been very grateful to see its passage through both the Senate and the Assembly. It's one of my 4 bills awaiting the governor's signature. My predecessors have attempted to do bills like this and have not been able to be successful in getting them this far. And I think this is going to be very good for our county, because what's important is when we build housing that it fits into the character of our community. Affordable housing is something that I think many of us can support and do, but it needs to fit in with our communities and not change it. And I think the other thing that's very positive about affordable housing is it makes sure that people who work here are also able to live here. But again, it must fit in with the character of our communities, which AB 1537 will help us to do. And I've been very proud of our success thus far, and I'm hopeful for the governor's signature.
Thank you. I would like to just follow up on the question, dig a little bit deeper. What is your definition of affordable housing, and what is the target market specifically for affordable housing? Greg, we'll go back to you.
Yeah, I think a lot more needs to be discussed on AB 1537. First of all, this is a bill that is going to be, it's not going to affect it retroactively, and it's also going to create a floor, not a ceiling. That means that the maximum is going to go far above the 20 that's being projected right now per acre. Marin County has 7 units per acre, and back in the 70s, they did a really good job of protecting the green space, ensuring that counties and cities didn't grow out of whack. I think that's important. That's what maintains a character, not a bill that's going to go into place to lower the threshold from 20 or 30 to 20. Again, we're at 7 right now. So I think it's important that everybody understands exactly what's happening here. This is a bill that is flawed because the people of this district should be the ones making that decision, not assemblymen and not bureaucrats in Sacramento. This is all part of a bigger project put on by Plan Bay Area, ABAG, and other agencies of elected officials that are appointed to a body. They're imposing this on Marin County because they know once they get to occur here, it's going to be a lot easier to put it in other parts of the state as well. I think it's important that the voters send a message and get rid of this bill and send Assemblyman Levine back into the private sector where he can do a lot better for himself.
Thank you, Greg. And just really quickly before we go over to Mark, would you like to provide a definition of affordable housing? Like, I understand that you've been discussing the bills and the proposals, but specifically, what is your definition and the target market for affordable housing in Marin?
Marin County is one of the wealthiest counties in the United States, so it's a difficult thing to try to break into this environment. I got 2 young kids that have just graduated college. They're new in the workforce. It's almost impossible for them to buy property here. But I think like the projects in Ignacio that we had a few years back where it was on a lottery system, I think some good occurred there, but it's also kind of the area that you don't want to walk through because there's a lot of difficult crime that's taking place and other things that occur. A lot of times you have to do these things naturally. Marin is a high cost of living area because it's supply and demand. There's not a large population base here yet, and if Assemblyman Levine and the other people in Sacramento have their way, they're going to institute a made-up environment here, a way that's going to be legislated to increase the capacity. They're going to put greater strain on resources, on the sewer, sanitation system, police, fire department, school systems. We don't need that. We need to have natural growth. We need to maintain property values. We need to ensure that those values increase, they go up, and that the only way that that's going to happen is when we get rid of these types of flawed legislation and let the people like what happened in Larkspur, let them stand up and say what it should be in their town and in their district.
Thank you, Greg. And Mark, I'm going to give you extra time. I was really looking for a short answer, but thank you for taking time to explain your position on the issue. But again, Mark, really, what is your definition of affordable housing, and what is that target market for affordable housing?
Sure, it's an important question. I don't know what the magic number is. Of course, there are formulas for that to work, but there is that challenge where if you live in Marin or you work in Marin, can you afford to live in Marin? And not everyone is going to be able to, but can we find ways to make sure that the commutes are cut back and our traffic is a little bit lighter, and of course that the pollution that we have in Marin, most of the pollution in our county actually comes from highway traffic, from people commuting. So how do we make sure that we protect our natural environment as best as possible and also strengthen our economic vitality? And so there have been a number of opportunities for that to happen in and around, say, downtown San Rafael and other places where that's actually worked pretty well. So we need to find those models of success and, of course, push back on top-down policies from Sacramento, which AB 1537 essentially does, which makes Marin, puts Marin in a place that it hasn't been in for over a decade to decide some of these local densities that otherwise we've had to follow from Sacramento. So this is actually a very positive change and not any of the make-believe that my opponent would like to push out on us. This actually empowers local communities, which has been a theme of my work these past 2 years.
Thank you, Mark. And any other time you would like for that question, or would you like to move on?
I'm very happy to move on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're moving on to taxes now. Is the state's tax system fair? Do some taxpayers get a better deal from the state than others? And we will begin with Mark.
Well, I think that California's tax system is one that has developed over time, year by year, and has put us in a position where we can see a lot of inequities in how it's used for the state. Some things are taxed, other things aren't, but what's really important is how do we go about making sure that the tax system does not limit the growth of our economy and actually can strengthen it. And that's why I've been very proud to vote for and support tax credits for job creation in the state of California, for R&D, for manufacturing, as well as a co-authoring a tax credit, $330 million a year, for film and television production, where Northern California benefits at a greater level than LA does. Believe it or not, LA would only receive a 20% tax credit, but production in places like Marin County would receive a 25% tax credit. I'm the only member on the Arts and Entertainment Committee in the Assembly from north of LA, and I'm very proud to have been able to make sure that we would benefit at the high level that we're going to receive. But I think even more important, when we talk about the concerns we have in our community about property taxes, the bill that I mentioned earlier that the governor signed this morning, AB 2231, that I co-authored with Assembly members Gordon and Patterson, that allows for seniors and the disabled to defer property tax payments in a time of need. That makes it fairer for them to make sure that they're not priced out of their homes, that protects their ability to live in their property, much like Prop 13 did for them back in the 70s, that we're able to make sure that they are protected from today and for many more years to come.
Thank you, Mark. And Greg.
First of all, Assemblyman Levine opposes Proposition 13. He has voted against it on ACA number 8. He opposed it. He has spoken about it as opposition to Prop 13. Prop 13 is a reason that many of us and our families, our parents, our grandparents live in the state of California. It has created a situation that allows them to understand what their taxes will be going forward. It limits the increase of taxes. First of all, it requires taxes to be set at 1% of a purchased property's value with no more of an increase than 2% per year. That's something that people need to know. They don't need to be taxed out of their homes because bureaucrats and the Sacramento supermajority think it's important to put more tax burden on you. I think it's important that we also understand that environmental issues and other things that Senator Levine mentioned here a few minutes ago, AB 1537 will increase density. It'll increase traffic. It'll put greater strain on the resources. It'll increase all of the things that he's talking about, the environment and being important to maintain. So I don't quite understand how we can talk about protecting the environment on one hand, increasing density housing to 20 per unit, and how that is somehow going to benefit the environment, traffic, and other things. It's going to put a huge burden on everyone. We need to stop these types of projects. We need to stop them now. We need to send a message to Sacramento that we are no longer going to back these things.
Thank you, Greg. All right, turning to the issue of education. California has one of the largest achievement gaps separating white and Latino students in English and math scores, according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Other states have shown significant gains recently, yet California has not. What do you think is needed to help bridge this gap? Specifically, what programs could help? And we'll begin with Greg.
I think it's important for everybody to understand that education dollars that get to the classroom are limited. Right now, it's estimated that there's only about 60 cents of every dollar making its way to the classroom. We need to eliminate those high-level, high-paying jobs in education that don't impact the positive way of teaching in the classroom. I'm a charter school fan. I think it's an important way for us to increase math and science scores, and it's also a way for us to ensure that, as Assemblyman Levine discussed on the campaign earlier, that 80%, according to him, 80% of high school seniors in California graduate. If that's the case, then how come we're having test scores in the 46 to 47 range? We used to be one of the top states in the United States. We need to get back to that. We need to find ways to put the best teachers in the school, in the classroom, and find ways to get rid of the deadwood that's not doing a good job. It's important for us to understand that there are other ways that kids learn how to learn math and science. They need to be involved in software production, doing game production, things like that they enjoy doing. That'll ensure that we get more engineers in the state and the country. We're having a very difficult time in the high-tech recruiting field of finding qualified engineers. And the reason is we don't do a very good job in our schools of training these kids, doing the things that are interesting for them. So I do have a question for Mr. Levine as far as the 80% of college seniors that are graduating. How does that go in line with the 46 to 47 ranking that we have as far as testing is concerned?
And Mark.
Thank you very much for that question. So it's very important to close the gap, but it's not closing the gap, it's actually raising everyone up in the state of California. When voters passed Proposition 30, they said, before you do anything else, make sure that you don't cut education any longer. And in fact, we want to give more money to education. And so I've been very grateful in the past couple of budgets to be able to put billions back into education at the same time as repaying debt that we owed our schools because of the past budget deficits. What we've been able to do is also create a local funding formula to ensure that for those communities that have extra obstacles for their students to overcome, underserved communities, different socioeconomic statuses that we even have here in Marin County, that we're able to bring the resources to them so that as we're raising the standards for everybody, every community, all of the communities are going to do better. This is a long-term investment because every student needs to do well in California. Everyone must succeed for us to have students who then graduate into colleges and universities, but also into the good-paying jobs that will allow them to live in our community and be successful. And of course, for an economy like California is the 8th largest in the world, we are competing at a global level. So as we're investing in every student, we need to make sure that they're not just doing well for their scores or just graduating from high school, but that they're able to compete against the very best students from across the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. All right, I have two follow-up education questions, and I think I'm just going to put them both out there and then let you answer. The first is, there's been a lot of discussion about the Common Core recently. What do you think are the best things about the Common Core, and what do you think are the worst things about Common Core? And then following that, should preschool be as universal as kindergarten?
Sure, these are complex questions. California opted into Common Core a couple of years ago, prior to my time in the legislature, but what we've seen as we've learned more about Common Core today is that it helps students learn how to think critically and how to analyze facts and come to conclusions based on the information that they've gathered. These critical thinking skills are going to be important throughout life, of course also helpful for them to be able to write and communicate effectively. So it's less specific to what they need to learn than how do you learn, because we want students to be able to learn in every environment, no matter what they're studying, to be able to understand the breadth and depth of a subject. So as we figure out how this is working and how this is implemented, we'll learn a whole lot more. About 48 states have opted in or have chosen to be a part of this, led by the superintendents of public instruction of all of these states. And so this has now been implemented in the state of California, and I think it's going to be insightful for us to see what the near-term results are going to be. But of course, I think as Allison raised, when does learning begin? How do we prepare our students to be critical thinkers and to get to school ready to learn? Pre-K is a very important part of this. If we are able to teach our children in early childhood how to read and how to think, they'll be better prepared in those early grades. People think about high school as being really important. That's when you apply for college. But if you're able to read at grade level or above grade level in the second grade, you are on target. You are in the track to getting into college. And they can look at the data from second grade and prove that out. We really need to make sure that children are reached early on in their lives to make them into lifetime learners.
Thank you, Mark. And Greg, Common Core, thoughts and universal pre-K.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, Common Core, again, it tries to ensure that we have common standards across the country. I think the standards are something that's important. We obviously need to improve our scores in math and science, be more competitive worldwide, like Mr. Levine discussed. The thing I think that the difficult part that I don't understand, and many people that oppose it, is the critical thinking skills that were just talked about. It's not important in Common Core that you get the answer correct. It's how you got to the answer. So I think that that's something that needs to be dealt with. The curriculum is questionable at best. There's no job in this world that I've been part of where if you did the job correctly, that's okay, but the outcome or the correct answer is not what we're looking for. So I think it's important that we understand that and we fully evaluate Common Core for what it is. I also think it is important that we ensure that students and young kids are in school early. I think it's really important because, again, that's a responsibility that normally relies on the parents. Making sure that the kids are ready for school when they're at school age, helping them with their homework, doing things like that. So it all kind of ties in together. But as far as Common Core is concerned, again, the standards are good. The curriculum, in my opinion, it needs to be thrown out, and we need to do something completely different.
Thank you. All right. At every debate for whatever office, there's a question about employee pensions. So I have a two-part question that will begin with Greg Allen. Has California made any progress in balancing what has been promised with what it can afford? And what do you think should be done about pension spiking and the excessive use of overtime by public employees?
That's another great question. Again, I'm the only candidate in this race that's signed a pledge for citizens for sustainable pension plan reform. I think it's important that everybody knows that for the retirees that are out there that have done the things correctly, a promise made should be a promise kept. For the people that are currently in the system and those that are coming on later, we need to make some adjustments so that it remains solvent. If we don't make reforms happen now, none of these people are going to have the retirements that they're due. So again, I want to make sure that everybody understands my position on this. A promise made should be a promise kept. The people that have already retired, they should have nothing that changed as far as the retirement plans are concerned. But the people involved in the systems now and those that are following on later on, we need to make a big, big change in order to ensure that those dollars are there for you and for everybody else.
Thank you. And Mark.
Sure. I think I'm the only candidate here who actually has a track record of voting on pension reform. As a city council member, we made sure that we were able to create new formulas and new tiers so that, one, we could protect the pensions that we've promised, but also pay a sustainable pension to new hires. And then once in the legislature, I actually introduced legislation to continue pension reform, was passed unanimously through the legislature, signed by the governor, to make sure that the CalPERS Board of Directors has training and the financial expertise they need to make sure that they're making good and wise decisions. This is important, again, for the long-term sustainability of the CalPERS fund. It's the largest retirement fund in the world. And we need to make sure that not only are they investing well, but as they develop formulas, that they're developing them with that long-term goal in mind, which is ensuring that the pensions are there for the people who we've promised them to and that people have paid into, but that taxpayers are not on the hook for excessive losses and for promises that we're not able to keep. And we need to change that pattern that CalPERS had in the past to make sure that we respect those who work so hard for our state and local governments.
Thank you, Mark. We'll begin with Mark with the next question. What is your position on public transit workers' right to strike?
Well, this is a very complicated issue, and I think that we saw here in the Bay Area that this came up not only with the BART strike, but even just this week with the Golden Gate Ferry strike, which definitely had an impact on our local economy and, of course, making sure that people could get to work. Historically, this is an issue that has been collectively bargained, and I think that while the BART strike was not one that they made the case as to why it was necessary, that it's not something that we necessarily should be taking away at this point. It is something that we need to start considering depending upon how these strikes are used. So you always have to think, is there a right to strike? On what conditions should that ability be used? And this is something that people take very seriously, and again, is part of collective bargaining.
Thank you, Mark. And Greg?
Yeah, again, this is, again, like Marc Levine just talked about, this was a very big increased burden on the commuters like myself going into San Francisco. A lot of people take the ferry, a lot of people take the bus, and a whole lot of people cross the Golden Gate Bridge. We need to make sure that through collective bargaining, it's successful so that strikes don't occur in the first place. These people need to be listened to when they have their issues that are brought to the table. They need to not be pushed underneath the rug and dealt with at another time, because in doing this, when we put all those workers out on strike, again, the burden, the cost, the environmental impact that was negatively felt by everyone, it's critical that we ensure that we're making these types of arrangements and collective bargaining before the issues arise that will force these people to go on strike.
Thank you. Let's turn to the economy now. How healthy do you think the state's economy is? And please give us 3 ideas of what members of the State Assembly realistically can do to help the economy and create jobs. And we will begin with Greg.
Yeah, I think the governor and the people in the supermajority in Sacramento will have you believe that California is on its way back. I'm concerned that it's not on its way back. And the reason is that we're losing large corporations and huge numbers of jobs to other states. We just lost Tesla's battery factory to the state of Nevada. Toyota lost 4,000 jobs and moved them from Torrance, California over into Arizona. The state is not doing a very good job of recruiting. Every day I see on the news or commercials about New York and their tax-free zones, they're recruiting companies away. And the governor in Texas is doing a remarkable job of recruiting companies from California. We have to do our part to bring these companies back. We have to set a climate that's going to allow them to start jobs here, or start companies to increase their capacity, increase workers, and maybe train some workers up in these high-paying, high-tech jobs. We need to find ways to create wealth in California, not chase it away, not doing what Sacramento is currently doing to push jobs away from the state of California.
Thank you. And Mark.
The governor and the legislature has been aggressive in tax credits to ensure the jobs that we need to have in California are here. We've had historic large tax credits for the aerospace industry, over $400 million to rebuild that industry in Southern California, but also for film and television production, as I mentioned earlier, $330 million per year for 5 years, to rival New York's, in which Northern California will benefit actually better than LA will for those tax credits. It's incredibly important to me that as we took care of the enterprise zones that were flawed and didn't work and got rid of them and actually created credits for research and development and for manufacturing jobs, that we see how well they play out. It's important to invest in, but we don't want to give away the farm. Just because a business wants to start something new, that we need to make sure that it makes sense for California, that the jobs are the jobs we need, they pay the salaries that we need them to pay, and that we don't give away any benefits that we would have. I think that was something that we were very careful about, particularly in those communications and discussions with Tesla, that while they may be building one of their gigafactories in Reno, those jobs in Northern California will still be there because the cars are manufactured here and all those batteries are going to be brought to California, and we'll have that benefit without giving away the farm. So we have to be very careful, very circumspect about how we give away the hard-earned money that taxpayers pay and not just give tax credits left and right. The other one that I think is important is making sure that there's a clear link between educating our future workforce and the jobs of the future in the state of California.
Thank you. Looking at disaster preparedness, Napa just experienced a large earthquake, but in the grand scheme of things, that earthquake was really small potatoes in terms of what is predicted to occur at some point in the state. What is your plan to make sure that action is taken now to mitigate the predicted disaster? What can the state legislature do? We'll begin with Marc.
Sure. In my first year in the legislature, we actually passed legislation to create an early warning system for earthquakes that would be housed at Caltech and that would have sensors, of course, throughout the state to make sure that we would know as soon as possible what could occur. But a lot of that preparation begins very early. And when I was a resident in San Rafael, or still am, but when I first moved, I took one of those community programs about how to respond to disaster relief. And it's something that we all need to be preparing for as individual community members to make sure that our communities are safe, which is extraordinarily important. In the aftermath of the Napa earthquake, I toured some of the damage in Napa, both in some public buildings as well as in the downtown area, and saw how our communities are at risk from a lack of being prepared. So there's a whole lot more that we can do, particularly in partnership with our local jurisdictions. We had FEMA as well as the state's Office of Emergency Services with us on that Napa tour. So we're going to be taking back those lessons and those best practices and figuring out how do we make sure that if this occurs here in the North Bay, but also throughout California, what can we learn to better prepare ourselves in the event that this disaster does occur? And we know it's a matter of when, not if.
Thank you. And Greg.
My heart goes out to the people that were negatively impacted by the earthquake in Napa. Again, and like you mentioned, Professor, that was a small one compared to what we anticipated is going to come down the line. I do think that having an early warning system could be helpful, but to rely on that solely is pretty foolish, because the way that they're going to notify people is going to be limited by the fact that you're either by your phone or you're going to hear a horn blare. If you're in your car, you may not hear anything. So a lot more needs to be done at the individual level. We need to make sure that people understand that, hey, the electricity may go out, water may go out, services may go out for an extended period of time. So it's up to the individuals to make sure that they're ready. A lot more also needs to be done in working with the towns and cities and county to ensure that they have the right type of responses available and that they can get these services back online as quickly as possible and take care of those people that are in need the most. The elderly, obviously, people with special needs, the disabled, they need to be taken care of in a different way most likely than other folks. They need help, and they're going to need it quickly. So I think a lot more needs to be done in the planning phases, and I'm all for increasing the capacity and availability of the warning system. But again, it's not going to be the end all.
Thank you. We're going to turn to healthcare now, and we will begin with Greg. Millions of Californians have signed up for the Affordable Care Act. What is your assessment of how it is going, and do you think it will make healthcare better and more accessible for Californians?
Again, Obamacare, as a lot of people like to describe it, is not giving us what it was built to do. Being a disabled veteran, I know that when you go into the VA hospital, you're given the type of care that everybody can expect through an Obamacare type project and healthcare system. I think it's important that we try to make changes to the law. It is law now. We're stuck with it, so we're not going to be able to repeal it. But we are going to have to find ways to adjust it, amend it, and to ensure that maybe we can allow insurance companies to be sold across state lines, making the market competitive again. Doctors are beginning to find out the difficulties that are involved on their end. They're having an increase in patients that they need to see on a daily basis. So a lot of things are starting to be hashed out, and we're starting to see the problems that come along with that. I think it's important that we try to get back to letting the free market do what it does and let the people do what they think is best for themselves and their families.
Thank you. And Marc.
When I was first elected to the legislature, we voted to make sure that healthcare in California was fully funded in what is called Covered California, which is the most successful healthcare exchange in the United States. This has been wildly successful in making sure that Californians have the healthcare coverage they need. Millions of Californians who did not have healthcare before now do have it, as well as making sure that pre-existing conditions do not preclude them from the important healthcare coverage that they need. Very proud of that work. I'm extraordinarily proud of the hard work of everyone at Covered California to make sure that that is succeeding. But I think what's important is that when people have problems with accessing Covered California, making sure that they're enrolled, that people have called my office, and we've been able to hold their hand through the process, make sure that they get the coverage that they need, and ensuring that they do, in fact, have the ability to access health care, which is what we're actually hoping for. Coverage is great, but you have to have access to the health care you need. And it's been a real privilege for me and my staff to be able to work with so many people to make sure that they've been able to get that.
Thank you. Despite the fact that it seems like everyone is constantly connected to the internet these days, there is a digital divide that exists in California. Increasingly, children need to be able to access the internet to do their homework. Applying for jobs is often solely online now, and the ability to obtain information about one's community, issues, and policies is also dependent on internet access. What can the state legislature do to level the digital divide that exists in California? We'll begin with Marc.
The digital divide is an issue that I've been working on for a long time. Earlier in my career, I was a fellow of the Zero Divide Foundation based right here in the Bay Area to work with underserved communities to make sure that they had the access that they needed that so many of us take for granted. We've looked at a number of ways to make sure that we're able to push this type of technology and connectivity into local communities throughout California, whether it be through school districts and libraries or empowering local jurisdictions to have broadband tools that they need. Of course, prior to my time in the legislature, I also served on the Marin Telecommunications Agency, where we looked very carefully at this. And I believe a lot of these are local government decisions, and we should be empowering those local jurisdictions to find ways to make sure that that access is there and with the state resources that they need.
Thank you. And Greg?
I think this is another example where we can benefit through public-private initiatives. We can ensure that that broadband is brought to some of the rural areas in particular, and some of the areas in the state that are not, they just don't have access right now. So more technology is going to bring things to the forefront. It'll help to get that message out and to get that availability of the internet to many other people that don't have it currently. I'm also a proponent of net neutrality, which is free speech on the internet. I think it's important that legislative bodies like ours in California, as well as Congress and the federal government, do what they need to do to ensure that our fundamental right of free speech is maintained. Obviously, we don't want adult content to be seen by people that are minors and other folks, but we do have to ensure that the government does not get in the way of freedom of the individual. Again, net neutrality is an area that I think a lot more needs to be discussed about it, and we need to make sure that, again, the government does not get in our way on that.
Thank you. Looking at the issue of prison overcrowding, under the label of realignment, the state has been transferring certain categories of prisoners from state prisons to local jails. How can local governments afford to accommodate them? And what do you believe is the main cause of overcrowding, and what can be done to relieve overcrowding? We will begin with Greg.
Thank you. This is a very important issue. Overcrowding is something that we're obviously faced with because we've had difficult laws that have had mandatory minimum sentences applied. I think it's important that we keep those very, very difficult to deal with types, anything that's dealing with violence, anything against children or minors, they need to be locked up and kept back there for a long time. But those types of crimes that maybe are less of a hazard to other people and more of the individual per se, they probably need to be adjusted in considerable ways so that they're not locked up, overcrowding our jails. I think, again, we've gotten away from what freedom is all about, and then we need to try to find ways to keep those other dangerous folks behind bars, not letting them out just because of the fact that overcrowding has occurred, but to really evaluate our laws and get rid of those things that are not working and try to find ways to really take advantage of the things that we know now and adjust and keep those laws on the books that are effective and that do work.
Thank you. Turning back to the issue of higher education.
Question?
I'm sorry. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, realignment has actually worked very well for a county like Marin counties, and one of the reasons for that is because we have used diversion programs for those who are nonviolent offenders who can find another way to, repay for their crime, but also be rehabilitated and make sure that they're not recidivists. And that's been a very big problem for the state prison system, is that for those counties that just send prisoners in, they become recidivists for life. They keep on going in and out of the system. And this has been a very big problem. The other one is, of course, the mandatory sentencing. So if we look at Marin as a model, and we're able to divert those who are not violent and don't pose a threat to people, we keep them out of prison for life, essentially, if we can make sure that they're able to be part of our community and actually be contributors. And we actually have money that follows us in Marin County because of that. We get extra money because we are diverting people from prison. In other counties, they also get money, but that's money for people who are coming from the prisons back into the county jails. So they have to spend that money on the jails rather than the diversion program, and we know that the diversion programs are so much more successful because they're not just re-entering the prison system. And this is a model that hopefully many counties will be adopting, so that we don't create a system where we're just having people go in and out throughout their entire life and not being contributing members to society.
Thank you, Mark, and my apologies for not having you answer that question. Turning now to the issue of campaign finance. Given the recent U.S. Supreme Court rulings that have allowed an increase in what is being called dark money, what role do you think disclosure and transparency should play in campaign finance? And we will begin with Mark.
Well, this is a very important question, I think, for so many of us who are dealing in politics and running for office. We see that it requires a great amount of money. But what's important is disclosure and transparency, so people understand who's participating in that system. This is true both for candidate campaigns like the campaigns that Gregory and I are running, but also for ballot initiatives. We need to make sure that there's very clear disclosure, that everything is completely transparent, and we know what money is trying to influence policy in the state of California. I'm supportive of more aggressive transparency laws and disclosure laws for the state, and I will be continuing to work on that throughout my time in the legislature.
Thank you.
Thank you. Citizens United is a law that was passed some time back. It's obviously been controversial. I know that President Obama made a point to talk about it at one of the State of the Union addresses, where he thought that the Supreme Court ruled incorrectly on that. Citizens United has also helped to ensure that there's been a split from campaigns to PACs. PACs are not required to report in the same way that a campaign is. Campaign maximum contributions are now at $4,100 per person per election. These are requirements that I think are very effective. My opponent, Marc Levine, and other people believe that we need to get rid of this type of a law. I think it's important that people understand everything that's happening. Full disclosure is critical, and we want to ensure that every campaign is wide open and the contributions that are being made can be locked to the people that made them. And again, I think it's important. Citizens United needs to continue on.
Thank you. We have time for just a couple more questions. Politicians these days do not necessarily have the best image or the best reputation in some cases. How would you work to improve the overall image of politicians? And we will begin with Greg.
That's a great point. Again, my opponent, Marc Levine, is a prime example of somebody who will be flip-flopping on issues. He'll take money and be on the side of fracking, and then when it seems like it's politically the time to go against it, he went against it. So he also has done very many other things where he's just, again, ducked votes and things like that. These are the types of things that the people that put us in office, they elect us to go there and do a job. They elect us to get there and to take up really difficult votes and to hang it out there to find out exactly what they are, because we are their representation. So unlike my opponent, Marc Levine, when you send me to Sacramento, I'll vote on every issue. I won't duck it because it politically makes more sense for me to do that. And I will not waffle like my opponent has.
Thank you. Mark.
Can you tell me the question again? I was so busy being entertained by my opponent.
Absolutely. How would you work to improve the overall image of politicians?
That's a very good question. First of all, it's about being honest with voters and respecting voters and being very clear with them, rather than the make-believe world that my opponent lives in. But it's that important to really make the case to voters as to how we come about our decision-making and policy-making. And when I ran in 2012, the legislature was not very well regarded. And in fact, today, 2 years later, I think the approval ratings, while not as high as I'd like them to be, are probably twice as high as they were and much higher than Congress is. And so we've been able to communicate that we're actually tackling the problems facing California, that we're actually looking at the intended outcomes of legislation, that we're trying to get things right. But I think, again, it's important to just respect the voters, to speak up to them rather than down to them. I think that voters are very tired of hearing politicians make things up, be critical, or be negative, rather than actually talking to the policy issues and how they're going to impact us here in Marin County. And I think that over the past 2 years, that's been a part of the relationship that I've built with Marin voters, is one of respecting them, but I think also earning their respect because they realize that I've been doing the hard work rather than doing the lazy way of voting that I described earlier of just looking who supports a bill or opposes a bill. I'm actually trying to figure out what the bill is attempting to do and making sure that it will be good for Marin County. And I've been very grateful for the relationship we've had an opportunity to build together.
Thank you. That concludes the questions. Before the candidates make their closing statements, I want to give you some important dates. Election Day is Tuesday, November 4th. The last day to register to vote or re-register if you have moved since you last voted is October 20th, 2 weeks before the election. Requests for absentee ballots must be received by the Elections Department by October 27th, 1 week before the election. Early voting opens at the Civic Center, room 121 on October 6th. If you go to the League's smartvoter.org website and enter your street address and zip code, you'll be able to see your own ballot with links to the candidates, issues, ballot measures, and information about the voting process itself. In addition, our website, marinlwv.org, has many other online resources for voters to research facts and campaign financial information. Now the candidates will make closing statements of 2 minutes. Reversing our order of opening statements, we will begin with Marc Levine.
Yeah, thank you so much, Allison, as well as to my opponent, Gregory, and the League of Women Voters and the Community Media Center of Marin for hosting this debate. It's very important to make sure that voters know that they have a choice and that there's an election coming up, and to participate in this dialogue that we're having, not just here in this room, but I think that's happening across Marin and, of course, the state of California as this election comes up in a matter of days for those of us that vote absentee, and then, of course, in November. It's been an amazing pleasure and privilege for me to represent Marin County these past 2 years. They've been transformative years for the state of California. We have been able to pass 2 on-time balanced budgets. We've been able to invest billions into education, again, after years of drastic cuts. And we've been able to put 2 very important measures on the ballot this election. Proposition 1, a water bond, which invests in both climate change preparation and conservation during a historic drought, as well as Proposition 2, the Rainy Day Fund, which allows California to set aside money in good times to make sure that we don't need to make drastic cuts during bad times. And I would urge you to vote yes on those propositions. But for me and our community, what's been really an amazing part of this period is both being able to pass 18 bills that have been signed into law, and again, I have 4 other bills awaiting the governor's signature, but also serving constituent needs, whether a constituent is waiting for their unemployment check, or to make sure that their taxes that they've paid to the Franchise Tax Board have gotten there, or to make sure that they've got the insurance that they're hoping for from Covered California, that when they call my office, when they reach out to me, that we're able to help them with those constituent needs. It's one of the most rewarding aspects of the job. It's not all about what happens just in Sacramento, but what happens right here at home that we're able to help people with. That means so much to people who actually live here, but I think also to me as I do this job. As I come about re-election this year, and I look forward to many more, I'm honored to be endorsed by the California League of Conservation Voters, Planned Parenthood, Congressman Jared Huffman, local mayors and council members from throughout the district, and I'd be honored to have your vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Greg.
Thank you, Professor Howard, Assemblyman Levine, the League of Women Voters for putting on this event. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you here today. I, again, want to make note of the fact that I'm not a politician. I'm somebody that keeps their word and will be there. Unlike my opponent, Marc Levine, I will not duck a vote. I will vote, whether it's a yay or a nay, I'll be there. I would think that bills like AB 375 are critical. They, again, regarded teacher discipline and dismissal process, Marc Levine supported that bill, was positive with it until it came to his final vote where he vanished and wasn't nowhere to be found. He also did the same thing again on AB 976, enforcement of civil penalties by the Coastal Commission. I think that's another issue that he was on the side of at one point, then was no show when it was time to be voted on. He's been in office a very short period of time, yet he seems to have bucked the trend and not showed up for very important votes because he feels like that was the lazy way to go about business. I believe it's not the lazy way. I think it's important that when you send a representative to Sacramento, in this case, as an assembly person, this is the only time we're going to get that our ideas, our positions heard in Sacramento. Marc Levine has done what he's felt was appropriate to continue his political campaign. I'm not a politician. When you send me to Sacramento, I'm not going to duck votes. I'll be there, do the difficult work, and I understand what's important for the people here in District 10, Marin County and Sonoma County. It's a critical time that we're facing right now. We've got a supermajority in Sacramento with the governor, the state senate, and the state assembly. And instead of worried about losing thousands of critical jobs to local states or neighboring states, they've gone about ensuring that we continue to protect the environment, passing legislation for limiting, in fact, outlawing plastic bags, and then working about football time and how much time a player can practice. I was a football coach at Drake High School here. I understand the importance of football time. I don't think it needs to be legislated by people in Sacramento. I think it's important that we send a message. We send Mr. Marc Levine along his ways in the same way that the supervisor that he sided with during the Lucas Silvera Ranch project. Send him on his way. Put him back into the private sector where he belongs. I'm asking for your vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes our debate. Thanks to the candidates for running, to Elaine for timekeeping, and to you, the voters, for watching.